Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of AskPB. Today we will talk about securing your small business, the crucial role of insurance in long-term stability. The rate at which India is growing, our economy is developing, it is extremely important to understand the role of small businesses. These small businesses form the very backbone of our economy. At the same time, it's important to remember that small businesses face unique challenges and problems of their own. So, hedging the risk in the right manner is extremely important. To help us understand more on this topic, we have with us Mr. Tarun Mathur, co-founder of Policybazaar and CBO at Policybazaar for Business. Welcome to the show, Tarun.
Thank you.
So, Tarun, let's start with the basics. Why do small businesses need insurance?
I think small businesses need insurance far more than the larger ones, right? And then you have to understand how risk works. Risk works in a way where it affects somebody worse when they're more vulnerable, right? Let me explain. Let us say that you set up a company which provides, a simple example, right? Provides maids to households, right? Very simple business, right? Now, what happens is when you're a small business and let's say you've only got 2 or 3, if even one event happens and let's say, the maids steal something from the household and then liability comes on to you. Now, you as a small business hardly has any funds, has to now cover for that risk which comes forth. Now, imagine if you were doing 100 maids to households and one came in, it's not so much a problem because you probably have revenues which kind of support it. Now, I know I used an odd example, but this is how liability comes about, right? Something which is very small or very infrequent suddenly comes about and makes it a big one. But these are law of large numbers. When you look at very, very small profiles, the risk becomes too humongous to cover. So when you set up a small business, let me also tell you that the premiums are so small that you don't need to worry about it, right? So supposing you are setting up something like if I open a shop, right, and then let's say I'm selling, stationery. While the chances are that nothing really can go wrong, like what could go wrong in a stationery shop, right? But if something happens, there's a problem. For example, in this stationery shop, if you have, let's say, you're selling something which is a paper knife or something, and somebody cuts and sells it, right? Now, there's a very simple policy which is called a comprehensive CGL, right? A comprehensive liability policy, comprehensive general liability. Finally got it right. And this will cover for anything that happens with the products that are there in the shop itself. And if something happens to anyone within the shop, it could be an employee, it could be somebody who's walking into your shop. And I think when you're just starting up, these things become all the more important because as you start generating revenues and your valuation comes up, then you will also afford a big part of any loss that could come up. So that's why I think small businesses should really think about insurance a lot more.
As a small business grows, how can the owner make sure that the changing insurance needs are assessed properly?
Everybody understands their own business, right? Now, let's say Policybazaar is a fine example, and we set it up. We had challenges in the beginning, and those challenges changed, and they metamorphosed into something else, and so on and so forth. And what one must understand is how does the risk grow in your business? For example, let's take the our example of a shop, right? We have one shop, the risk is different. If you have 10 shops, the risk changes dramatically. For example, manufacturing, right? Now, let us say you're in the manufacturing of something like yogurts. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm trying to take examples so that to explain my point further. When you start off, it's probably supplying through something like a Zomato or through Swiggy or something, right? Now, as it grows larger, maybe you're tying up with hotels where the yogurt is kept on the side, and maybe gets used as a raw material. Now, the risk in this business, in these 3 examples, is very, very different, right? The scale is very different. So, as you keep growing, because you understand your business better, understand what risk is associated with it, right? And I think that every like whoever is running the company must give it a thought, saying, okay, what liability can fall upon me? What could go wrong? Is it a big risk? Is it a small risk? You can also approach someone like us, right? At Policybazaar, we take pride in the fact that we will actually give you honest advice about what are the perceived risks. And then in discussion with you, decide whether this risk is large enough to self-insure or should we go and, let's say buy a plan. So I think it's upon the business owner in this case. I think nobody else can do as good a job as the business owner in identifying what are the possible risks.
If you were to recommend only 2 or 3 insurance products to a small business owner in India, which products would they be?
See, when you start a business, the first thing you must do is get a directors and officers liability. in a lot of contracts, if you, let's say you're going for funding also, it'll be part of the deal that you have to have. What does this mean? It means that if anything happens to the company or to someone else because of the directors and officers of that company, then and if there's a lawsuit, etc., then the liability policy pays for it. So I think it is the most important policy in my view. Now, then becomes a bit of segmentation depending on which business are you into. If you're into building a product out, like we took the example of somebody who has a company which, manufacturing yogurts, you need to have product liability. Product liability means that if any harm comes to someone because of your product, medicines for that matter, right? Then you protect it, and I think that's covered. So if what you could do is, if you're a smaller business and all these risks are kind of scattered or not well understood, just buy a comprehensive general liability policy. But as you go specifically into each industry, you can then modify your plan. So these are not off the shelf products. They will be customized to what is required of you. Product liability is a big thing in anything that's manufacturing. You also extend the covers by using something called product recall. So what happens a lot of times, and I remember when I had a car, and I remember the claims they'd made that they tested the whole air conditioning in Rajasthan. Rajasthan का पता नहीं, दिल्ली में तो चला नहीं. So they recalled all the cars back. They replaced the air conditioning in the Brit. Now there's a cost attached to this, right? And whichever company has to do it, they would want to know that these are things that keep happening. And as you evolve in your own company's life cycle, you'll realize that this could be a possibility. So these extended covers also you could opt for. So coming back to your original question, fundamental policies: get a directors and officers liability policy, or get a comprehensive general liability policy. And as it gets specific to different businesses, either get yourself a product liability or an indemnity policy, depending on if there's an indemnity requirement or a liability requirement if your employees go wrong. So I think that's how you would space it.
How can a business owner make sure that the business is not underinsured?
See, underinsurance is a huge problem, right? And let me now kind of put this into example. You have a shop, you have stock, you have a premise where you sell it, and anything could go wrong with the business, right? Broadly through this. And underinsurance is the biggest thing, because if you have stock, let's say, worth about 1 crore rupees, then it has to always be 1 crore rupees. It shouldn't be that you step up your shop, does really well, it's Diwali, so you take 2 crores and then hope like hell that nothing goes wrong. Because if something has to go wrong, with Diwali pe hi phootega. So at all times, use a policy through declaration, augment the policy during a season time, and talk to your advisor on what the best approach here is. And it's a basic bookkeeping exercise. See, any good businessman today, any trader, anybody who's running a shop, anybody who's running an office, they do bookkeeping. That's their largest role. It's a very tough role. It may seem like I'm just putting entries into a diary, but it's actually quite tough, because you need to know how much has come in, what of it is returned, what of it is getting used, what is sold. All this inventory management gets done in the bookkeeping. If you're a good bookkeeper, then you don't need to worry, because then you know exactly what's on your books, exactly what must be insured, and hence, if something does go wrong, then you're covered for the entirety of it.
People tend to believe that buying insurance is one thing and getting the claim approved and settled is a whole other ballgame. How do you think one can make sure that their claim gets settled and approved seamlessly?
Buy it from Policybazaar. Zyada mushkil tha nahi question, but on a serious note, although that's also on a serious note, but to explain, see, the whole part is, don't buy insurance for a mere contract or just because you think it should be there. Give it a little bit of time. If you have someone like us, then you should not worry. We will give you the right advice. But you should still at least ask what is being covered and what is not being covered. And are you declaring everything properly? Whether it is any sort of insurance in the world, if you have been truthful about what needs to be insured, the quantities, the quality, any risks that you foresee but are rare in nature, just come out with it. And if that declaration is true, then you do not need to worry about the claims. The insurance companies haven't set themselves up just to collect premiums, right? They cannot succeed that way. The whole part is that they are coming in, they're settling in a risk, and then they do pay claims as long as they are payable in nature. So if you've been truthful, you will surely get a claim.
Now it's time for our audience questions.
Sure.
Our first audience question is, what specific insurance policies should a tech startup prioritize?
So, let's think about this. I'm not the expert here, but let's think about what happens in a tech company, right? Let's assume that it's a company which is doing software. Okay. So, I'm Tarun Mathur. I set up a company called Tarun Mathur, IT Consulting Private Limited, and I go out and I go to the US and say, listen, I'm going to develop a software for your company. Right? That's my goal. Okay. Now, there's a contract that comes through. And I'm going to start developing software. Now that software could be wrong. There could be a problem. I would need a liability policy. First of all, it has to be protected against me, who set up the company, and I buy a directors and officers policy, liability policy. So that's a DNO. Now the second part is the product that I'm creating here, and I'm setting it up for a company in the US which needs continuity of operations, etc. And I'm setting it up here in India. I've got an office which is developing software. I think I would then buy what is a comprehensive general liability policy. And the third thing is the most important element to, I think, software development is the people here. So I think that the third policy, or actually all three policies I would buy in one go, would be to buy a health policy for the employees, because their health is actually what's going to actually determine whether or not we actually have a good product and a more revenue generating product in the end. Also, I would put forward that I would ensure that I'm buying from a company like Policybazaar, which gives you a lot of benefits alongside the health insurance, which means if there's some sort of OPD coverage, telemedicine, diagnostics, all of that put together, so that employees have only one-stop shop or one app to kind of look after their entire health.
As a small retail business owner, what are the key factors I should consider when choosing between different property insurance policies to ensure my inventory and physical store are adequately protected?
I think we covered this also.
Yes.
My answer is actually the same. You have to have a great bookkeeping practice. As long as your inventory is managed properly, I don't think the chances of underinsurance or going wrong on the policy itself will be there. Because if you ensure bookkeeping, and let's take example here, right? If you have the stationery store that we used to spoke about, then you know exactly how much of each material is coming in. Some of these policies, some of these products may be more attuned to a fire or to damage, right? So see, a fire policy covers fire and also covers water. So let's suppose that floods come in and that happens, and you've got something which is paper. You know that paper is going to get ruined in all probability. So that will get taken care of if you did the right bookkeeping. So you actually inform what is the amount of damage that could be caused if in case there's a water damage, or if a fire happens, then what could get destroyed, what could get saved, the premise itself. So again, the answer to it lies in good bookkeeping.
For a small manufacturing business, what types of insurance are crucial to protect against product liability claims and potential machinery breakdowns? And how can I assess the right coverage levels?
See, for a manufacturing unit, the ballgame is a bit different, right? You need to have a DNO policy, like I always say. You need to have a CGL, which covers product liability, as well as something like a product recall that I mentioned. And then you need to have a fire policy, because the premise that you're setting it up becomes, depending on what you're producing, of course, but that becomes a place of risk. And then a marine policy, because in all probability, when you're manufacturing, you're shipping it out, whether or not it's CIF or whichever way, that may be separate. But you will need these policies, whether with you or with whoever you're supplying to. So you need to make sure that these policies are in sync, as less intersection between the coverages as possible. But I think you will need all four of them on day one itself, and you should plan for that. I'm sure everybody kind of thinks about how much is the output, what was the throughput, and basis that they will have the policy in place. But these four policies to me are almost mandatory if I'm running a manufacturing.
In the hospitality industry, particularly for small hotels and restaurants, what insurance policies are most important to cover potential liabilities such as guest injuries, property damage, and business interruptions?
I think the hoteling business is the toughest when it comes to insurance, and I can't think of a policy that they should not own. Right? If you look at the entire package of liability policies that are served in India today, there's not a single policy that's not applicable. If I look at DNO, you require it. You look at ENO, it's required. You look at CGL, definitely required. You look at product liability, important, because then comes to full. So my answer to you would be, there is no policy I can think of that you shouldn't have. on the liability side. Then there is, of course, fire insurance, because these properties are massive. There's so much invested into it, so you can't not have a fire policy. Uh, and and uh, and for your employees, because hoteling is not easy. You would require a group health insurance for all employees. So I think that would be my recommendation for any small hotel coming in. But what you could do is you could see what limits you need to go to. For example, in a hotel, product liability wouldn't be that bad, because there is no real product. I think what one trying to say is there's a problem with the food, then there could be some sort of, but it's not such a large one. So you would not need a very high coverage for that. But yes, for the roof falling, you would require a big cover, right? For let's say some destruction happening in the hotel in terms of fire, or let's say some water inundation or something, that's a huge risk. So I think you'll have to customize depending on the size of your hotel and what you need. But yeah, I would kind of go to a Policybazaar for business and kind of get that advice out and see what's most important.
How should a small business owner in the professional services sector, such as a consulting firm or a law office, approach the selection of professional liability insurance to safeguard against claims of negligence or errors in the services?
As an omission, right, is the simplest policy, and it guards you against anything that your employees also responsible for. See, depending on what kind of advice and who you're giving it to, and I think in the advisory business there is no other, that is the product that you have. So like if you had a manufacturing unit, you would get a product liability. I think in this case, because the product itself is the advice, it is no different. And you could land into a soup, because especially like if you look at medical practitioners, right? There's so much that could go wrong, because at the end it's not, I can't say it's not, but it's not typically an exact science. So things go wrong during surgeries, during diagnosis and prognosis. Everything goes wrong, and as we become more and more litigious as a country, you're seeing a lot of lawsuits coming for and against doctors. The same thing with lawyers. The same thing with advisors. Like when we advise somebody on their insurance, we're also, or the advice I give you is also up to scrutiny at all points in time. So somebody could say that I've done harm by giving the wrong advice. So I need to protect myself. My organization needs to protect me and protect itself from the advice that I could give, which may be wrong in nature. And I think this is very, very true for consulting firms, for lawyers, for doctors. And you must kind of at least get counsel on what is the best kind of policy for you.
Thank you so much for all of those insights, Tarun. I'm sure they have been very, very helpful to our audience. And audience, if you still have any questions whatsoever, just drop comments in the section below and we'll take them up in the next episode.